Hello, world. Welcome to the Speed Strength Show. I'm Tommy.
I'm Braden, and that was a pretty crazy 3 or 4 months. Um,
We haven't recorded forever.
yeah, it's been a while. So I guess whoever's listening to this, thanks for sticking around or coming back or whatever. Um, we appreciate you, and yeah, that was just it was important for us, I guess, to take the time off. Life was busy for a bunch of different reasons. Um, Tommy's got a new job now. I know that,
Yeah.
and he's feeling excited about it.
Yeah, I mean a lot happened in the summer,
Yeah,
like just in general.
yeah.
Um I mean part of it too was my Wi-Fi was so unstable that it made recording very difficult, but I think that actually just led into a like I guess a nice break for
Hmm.
the summer. Like I got to spend a bunch of days, at the track and just learning and doing stuff with the club. Um I was off social media for that 3 or 4 months too because
Hmm.
we weren't putting out any new content. So then I wasn't posting about the show. So I got to just
Yeah.
sit back and chill out, not have to worry about posting content on social media. So it was just a nice break, I think, in general, to get to enjoy the summer. And I think now come back like really excited to record.
Mm. Yeah.
I don't know about
Oh,
you, like
definitely.
I'm very anxious. Like I'm super happy to be back behind the mic and have the headset on and be
Yeah.
rolling with it.
Yeah. I mean, I remember like doing the research for this episode and like that was a lot of fun. And I knew it was going to be like a lot of fun getting into this series and stuff. And we actually did record the intro twice before or
Yeah, it
like
was two or three times. And the
after we
Wi-Fi
were,
just kept
yeah.
just it was a
Um,
disaster. It was
and that
so
was,
bad.
yeah, that was like right after we recorded with Janae, or like shortly thereafter,
Yeah.
anyway. And yeah, those episodes came out and stuff, and yeah, the Wi-Fi died twice because apparently that's just something that happens in Windsor
Well, the
in the summer.
I'm pretty sure it has to do with like the AC units turning on. And then because there's power outages all the time. Because that time we were recording, it kept like the power kept going out.
Yeah, yeah,
So it was like the power cut for a minute or two, but then like it kills the recording. You're like, okay, do we try again? Okay, let's start recording again.
yeah.
And then the power cuts out again, or you get like even a power wobble. Power
Mm.
doesn't necessarily, but it like flickers, but then it kills the Wi-Fi connection
Hmm.
and everything shuts down. And then it stops the recording, and then you're sitting there like, I didn't want to stitch together 55 different 1 minute parts of recording together
Hmm.
into an episode. It's like it's just not worth it.
Yeah, exactly. And then yeah, and then we just never hopped on until now because yeah, I mean, like yeah, you were busy, I was busy. Um, yeah, just had like training sessions at the gym, my own clients, and my daughter's in daycare now part-time and was just trying to like soak up all the family time I could before that transition starts to happen. um
And we had a mega fun wedding that we attended.
and yeah, I got married,
That was a
which
good
is
time. I
that
had a
was
lot
a
of fun at that.
very good time. Yeah, well, I'm glad. I'm glad. Yeah, it was a great time. The next day was tough.
Oh, I
The
can imagine.
next
I
week
can
was
imagine.
tough. Because being married drains your soul. No, I'm kidding. That's not why. I was exhausted. Um, but yeah, no, that was a lot of fun. So yeah, big life changes. A lot of crazy stuff happened.
Like I said, I
Um,
think it was a good summer just in general where we got to
hmm.
take a bit of a step back and
Hmm.
like I said, you had all the time that you needed to like plan the wedding, and obviously that was a great time. Like I had so much fun being there. Like I said, that was a fantastic event. I wouldn't have traded that for anything. That was so much fun to be there, catch up with a bunch of people.
Hmm.
Um, I know it was way more work for you than it was for me because
It was way more
obviously,
work. It was way more work for Bronwyn.
okay, yeah, but all the planning that you do
That's what I
like
mean.
to get all that rolling, and then you're just probably so exhausted at the end of it.
Yeah.
Like even like at the end of the day, you wake up the next day and you're like, oh, it's gonna take me like 2 weeks to recover from this because of all the planning. All like
Yeah.
you're just shut down. But and you started the new. When was that you started? Like, was that April or May?
At SidFit.
Yeah.
Well, I started there actually in February, but it was picking up more and more.
Okay. Oh, that's right. Because it was just
So I
after
was getting,
the lockdown.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I was, you know, getting busier and busier and busier,
Yeah.
essentially until it's kind of like stabilized. Um, Over the course of the summer, kind of stabilized.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, and kind of settled into that, um, and then yeah, now my daughter's in daycare part time, so got a lot more time on my hands, which is nice to be able to to fit this into the schedule again. So yeah, very very excited, and yeah, super pumped to get back at it, especially this little series we're gonna do. I think is gonna be fantastic.
And we've
Um,
had this like in the oven waiting to cook it for
yeah,
five,
yeah,
6, 7 months.
for sure. Yeah,
Like we
because
were already
this,
talking about this back in February or March of this year, like
yeah,
February, March 2022. About
yeah,
like here are the ideas, like let's like start putting this together. This will be a really fun series to do. And here we are in September as of the recording now,
hmm,
like finally actually getting to putting it all together.
yeah, yeah. And yeah, I mean, it's something like the research going into this was a lot of fun to do, and something that had a large impact on how I was coaching, um, day to day. And it's something that I wish that I knew more about or had learned more about earlier on in my career. And I feel like it's like as I'm in the gym or as I'm talking to athletes, clients, whatever, like it's information that just really isn't out there. Like a lot of the time anyway. Like it's not something that people think about. And I guess now is a good time maybe to actually share what we're gonna be talking about.
Yeah.
Um is motor learning in general, perception, um, like cueing, coaching, drill selection, just like all the stuff that is coaching. Like we spend a lot of time focusing on the science behind like how the body works and how to make movements more efficient. And we like to learn about muscles and nerves and the metabolic systems and cardiorespiratory systems, and we like to have the knowledge, but this is the part that gets the important pieces into the athlete's head. It doesn't matter how much you know if they can't understand what you're saying, right? So this is how you get them to be able to do what you want them to do.
And learning, I think like when you say the word learning, we have this default that we think of like sitting in a classroom, chalkboard, whiteboard, smartboard, whatever it is. Like we have, I think that's almost like the default image that goes to somebody's brain is almost this like classroom school type
Mhm.
setting. But when we think about like learning is that is coaching, that is sport, like getting better at
Yeah,
your sport, getting better at the movements, getting stronger, getting faster, all those things that effectively is learning. It
yeah,
doesn't look like our stereotypical image or thought of learning, but at the end of the day, everything we do as coaches, everything we do as practitioners working with individuals, whether that's in sport and fitness, life and health promotion, things like that, we're effectively teachers of
yeah,
those things. And so it's kind of wild to think about. Like you mentioned, there's so much emphasis on biomechanics, physiology, the nervous system, all this type of stuff. But like we almost never take the time to think about, even though we're learning all those things, we don't actually talk about like how people learn and actually create adaptations and
mhm,
figure out how to do things, because ultimately that's what we are employed to do. We are
yeah,
employed to create changes for people who are looking for change in what they do.
yeah, 100%. It's yeah, like your as an athlete, your practice is your study, and as a coach, like your coaching is teaching. Essentially, you could take the same, like you got a sixth grade math classroom, teacher's the coach, and then all the other ones are the team. The kids are the team, and
Yeah.
it's the exact same thing. And I'm sure everybody listened to like that is listening had subjects that they struggled with and subjects that they did really well in, that were easy to understand, maybe because they had a really good teacher that could teach in a lot of different ways, and subjects they struggled with, maybe that wasn't the case, or some things are a little bit more intuitive than other things. And like you and I have had clients and athletes that they day one they get it. Maybe they get everything easy, and there's other people that day one they get nothing. And it takes a really long time for them to figure it out, but you need to have the tools in the toolbox to be able to help them understand what they need to be doing, regardless of if they're like naturally gifted or not. You don't really, this stuff doesn't matter for the people that get it right away. You just tell them to do it and then they do it and then it's fantastic. And then there's nuances of how to get a little bit more out of them. But
Yeah.
um, this stuff is it's important for the people that have a hard time, you know.
And that's why hearing what you described when you first started talking about it, it's shocking to me that it's not the underpinning of coach education. And like, no one talks about this stuff, and
Mhm.
it's not in the NSCA textbook. It's not in, I haven't really come across content like what we're going to talk about in the NCCP courses and things like that. So it's actually shocking that it is ultimately, I think, the underpinnings of what makes a great coach athlete relationship and allows the athletes to learn.
Yeah.
But it's almost never talked about except amongst like professionals in the field, that you have some conversations back and forth, and, oh, what have you tried, what have I tried, okay, and then you share ideas. But there's nothing that I've come across in a very formal sense just to introduce to like a new coach, hey, have you thought about this? Because there's stuff for, have you thought about physiology, have you thought about biomechanics, have you thought about
Mhm.
those other things? But there's nothing sort of formally just to set the stage, like, hey, have you thought about motor learning, have you thought about how the brain functions, how it takes in information, and how people eventually end up making changes to what they do. And because that's really what we're trying to do. We watch someone perform something, we go, that wasn't very good. What we're actually doing is trying to create a change in that individual and how they do it.
Yeah,
So to me,
yeah,
that's such a huge part of coaching. I'm surprised there's nothing that just kind of gets the ball rolling for young coaches.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You're 100% on the nose there because I wonder if people think that coaching is just a practice skill, which it is, like it's a practice skill, but there is information that exists out there on how to do it well, just you know, like there is information of how to build muscles more efficiently than in other ways, which we've talked about. Um, and maybe the other part is just that the science is the stuff that you need to learn, and like regurgitating maybe is enough because if you do that over and over and over and over, then people start to kind of get the idea, you know. But there's definitely more efficient ways to do it, and I'm glad you pointed out that like the science, knowing the science, I think is really good at helping us say like, yes, that repetition was poor, but knowing that you've made zero progress, you have not changed anything, you haven't helped this person at all they know is that what they're doing is bad. They don't know how to do something better. And this is the last thing I'm going to say, maybe, and then maybe we get into like the more foundational stuff. But what I see so often is people telling the athlete what they need to do to make the thing better instead of how to do it to make the thing better. Like if somebody's off balance in whatever movement's, like, oh, keep your core tight. Great cue. Like, yes, that is absolutely probably the solution, or at least it will help. If I'm a novice, I don't know what the heck that means. I don't know where my core is. And for an experienced athlete, they will know what you mean. But for a beginner, they don't, yeah, they have no idea what that means. And so this is kind of the goal of this series, I guess, is to get more towards the how. And we already know the what. If you're here, we've talked about a lot of stuff. You probably know most of the what's by now. So yeah, I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah. I mean, and so that's why I think like it's important, that example you just gave, that's why it's important to talk about this stuff. And I think that's why we're so excited about it. I know I've looked at this stuff, here and there throughout my entire coaching career, because it's always something I'm trying to, you know, be more proficient at. And having worked with so many different populations, I've worked with 7-year old kids that have never done stuff before. And you have
Hmm.
to get things across to them that are different than you would a 21-year-old kid who's in college,
Hmm.
or a 30-year-old professional. Like they all understand things to a different level. And so at the end of the day, when we talk about, you know, cueing, instruction, motor learning, like all these types of things, like the first thing I think of is what is learning? Because that's
Hmm.
ultimately what we're trying to do. An athlete will say, I want to learn how to squat, or I want to, you know, that's an example. They're trying to learn. And so what is learning? And the best kind of summary definition I can come up with across all the papers is just learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, the movement expression, the actions that we do, that's just a behavior that we perform. And if somebody typically performs it in this way over here, and then over time we give them instruction, we provide them with drills, we do work with them, and they start to shift over to the other side, and they usually perform the movement this other way, good or bad, we have created learning because you've created a change in how they perform that action.
Hmm.
Doesn't always necessarily mean it's a positive change, because we can potentially, learn bad habits. But
Yeah.
learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior. So as coaches, what we're always going after is creating a relatively positive change
Yeah.
in behavior, or a desired change in behavior.
Hmm.
Um, and so to me, that's like the underpinning definition of learning, and what we probably want to think about kind of throughout the series is that that's always what we're aimed towards.
Hmm. Yeah. I really, really like that. I really like that definition, and that relatively permanent, because no one's going to be 100%. And yeah, and you see that over time as people start to get a little bit more consistent in that change. And the one thing that stood out to me there is, I think you can learn something and still, like, the desire to do it that way has to be there too. Because you're learning a new pattern, so that now you have a relatively consistent ability to do it this other way, and you probably could choose to do it the way you were doing it before if you wanted to, or any of the patterns in between. um, and if you are not focused in the right way, then maybe you revert back to the way you were used to doing it before, without without that intent that led to the change. And so that's, I guess, like the stages of learning is the first thing that I thought about. And how you go from beginner, where you require a lot of focus to make a little bit amount of change, and then that change is very infrequent. um and it's a lot more random, I guess, how well you're performing. um and then you progress, and the you probably still need the same amount of focus, but you're much more consistent in making the change, and then you progress further, and then you need much less focus, or more specifically, I should say, your focus can change into more detailed parts of the movement, or on more external stimuli. um like if you're part of an open sport, then you don't want to be focusing on how to do a crossover step in basketball. You want to be looking at your defender and, like, is the crossover step the right thing to be doing right now? you know but it is that repetition, and the focus that influences the speed at which you are able to make those changes. At least that's one of the things that influences that. There are many.
And the points that you bring up maybe speak to why this isn't as commonly talked about, because it does become very complex, right?
Mm.
When we think about, oh, what is learning? Oh, it's creating a relatively permanent change. Hopefully it's a positive change. That's what we're looking for, or the desired change. And you go, okay, simple enough. But then when you start to think about Learning is, it combines the user or the participant. It combines the tasks that they're trying to do and the environment in which they're trying to do that task. And as soon as you start to blend all those things together, it becomes a very complex thing to go after. And so you talked about like the motor learning theories. Yes, we're we're trying to figure out, how do people learn? How do they, what's the word I'm looking for, display or illustrate the movement or the action that they're trying to do, and how does that progress over time? When we talk about the environment, and you talked about being in an open sport, how are you obtaining and receiving information and cues and signs from the outside environment around us, and then what's going on internally within our body, the user, the participant, in terms of combining, okay, what do I know about the movement? What's going on with everything outside around me? And that all has to get processed within the brain and figure out what to do. And then the brain has to deliver action to the body to get it to do whatever. When you start to think about learning is not just, again, I go back to that stereotypical example of the classroom. Learning is not just like memorizing or remembering one thing. Like, oh, the teacher told me whatever and wrote it on the board. I have to remember that definition. It very much becomes a response reaction driven, chaotic thing where things happen in sport super quick. You have to take in all that information. You have to figure out what to do with it. You have to process the best plan of action. And then you have to perform that all within less than seconds
Yeah.
sometimes. And I think that's where motor learning becomes very complex, because you have to think about, how do we actually learn and perform the tasks? What changes are made over time? How do we perceive and take in information? What is the task we are doing? What is, there's so many things that start to get mixed
Mm-hmm.
into that soup, that at the end of the day, that becomes a pretty complicated recipe, because it's
Mm-hmm.
not just one or two ingredients. It's a lot of things being thrown in, and there's a lot of things you have to account for as the coach or the person who's facilitating the learner, the task, the environment. As
Mm-hmm.
the coach, you effectively have control over some of those parameters, and you have to decide, how are you having all those things work together to create that desired change in behavior.
Yeah, and so this is a thought that helped me kind of simplify it a little bit. Um, Learning, I think, is the speed at which you learn is directly related to the information available and the information that is perceivable or understandable, I guess, depending on how you want to phrase it. Meaning that if you take a complete beginner, show them a completely new movement. We'll take the squat. You're talking about the squat. And you show them what a squat looks like, and you give them one or two things to focus on while they perform their own squat. They've never done this before. There is an infinite amount of information available. And just from that one rep, they'll have a like they go from having zero understanding to how to do a squat to then having some kind of an idea, which is like an infinite change, you
Yeah.
know. Um, and then through repetition, they can make a lot of progress quickly from just repeating that one very simple task. You take somebody that's been competing in powerlifting for 15 years, they've done maybe millions of squats. Showing them how to do one body weight squat is going to have zero impact on what they do because there is no new information there for them, right? Um, and then you flip it around. Maybe this person who's been competing for 15 years is squatting 700 pounds. If you load up, maybe not even 700 pounds, but whatever this hypothetical beginner is capable of for their max squat, and you put that on their back right away before they've practiced anything, there's a lot of information there, as like you need to be able to stabilize, your torso and your hips, and at the same time yield under the pressure, and keep your foot pressure in the right way and your torso lean in the right way. And there's a lot there, a lot more than in a body weight squat, but they aren't at a level in which they can understand or perceive all of that information, so the information being available to them doesn't matter.
It gets
you know,
lost.
exactly. So the challenge, I guess that's the right way to say it. The challenge needs to match the skill of the person you're trying to make these improvements with. Um, and if it's outside of the optimal range, then learning will suffer. And there are a lot of things, this is where it gets complicated again, that influence how available the information is. And that is, like the task difficulty, the skill of the performer, the environment, um, the type of practice. Like we talk about, like there's blocked, random, and then there's like
Yeah,
some in between.
yeah.
Um, feedback. Feedback is another huge one. Focus of attention, time, repetition. Like there's a lot of things that can be manipulated, and that is where it gets complicated for you as the coach.
Exactly. And so I think you bring up a good point with the, um, the where is the learner at? Because typically, if you look at, you know, learning research and things like that, some of the first things you come across are, some of the actual motor learning theories that people have, researched. And I don't know, personally, I don't know where you stand on some of these, but there's not really one that I think is the be all and end all. Again, I think there are theories and concepts that are out there. Probably all of them carry some things that are probably true and probably false. So if you look at like what you talked about, like Gentile's taxonomy is, a 4x4 grid that looks at the learner, the task, the environment, and something performed very slowly, that's stationary with no time constraints. That's like, on the easiest end of the matrix, right? Versus all of a sudden you can move to the most complex task where you are on the move, things happen very quickly. You don't have a stable base of support, for example. The environment is changing. And so that's an example of, Gentile's taxonomy. You could decide, if you were teaching somebody a new skill, well, how do I progress them? How do I move from, the first square to the next one to the next one, and kind of work through in terms of, well, I'll add time constraints, or I will, increase the difficulty of the task, or have them on the move. Kind of Keel has a similar theory where all learning is, the motor learning is based around timing and the rate of movement. So again, as you speed things up, it makes it more difficult, which, I mean, makes sense if I tell you to, even if you think about like learning a piece of music or something, if you have to play one note every minute, you're probably going to have no problem doing it. But
Mm-hmm.
if you have to play every note very quickly, then now you have to respond to things much faster. So I mean, there's theories out there around, like, the capabilities and restrictions. So if someone wants to look at Gentile's taxonomy or Keel as an example of, how people learn, and then we have the other more traditional models that you talked about, like the stages, right? So like Fitz and Posner with the
Mm-hmm.
classic 3-stage model, like cognitive stage.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody's never done it before. Everything is going to be new to them. You're going to see a lot of mistakes, a lot of variability in the movement. And then they move to the associative stage, and then they move to the automatic stage, where people don't. It seems as though they don't even have to think about it. They just do it,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you watch somebody, like you said, if you're using the squat example, the person who's squatting for the first time, you're going to see all kinds of different things going on when they're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Versus the power lifter of 15 years, that squat's probably going to look exactly the same almost every single time they've done it, because it's probably pretty close to automatic.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of attention they have to give to it. And, Bernstein's model, I actually like quite a bit, the degrees of freedom,
Mm-hmm.
where he was the one that did that classic experiment where he was tracking I think the hammer with blacksmiths.
Yep,
I don't even know
that's
if
what it
anyone's
was.
a blacksmith anymore. It's probably a profession that's gone by the wayside, but he was looking at people that were learning it for the first time, and how the path of the hammer was super large, super different, super variable
Mm-hmm.
early on. But then as someone gets very, very good at it and they spend more time at it, the pattern or the movement of the hammer becomes much more repeatable and consistent. And
Yeah.
so this idea that oh, there's a large variety of movement. And then as you get better and better at something, that window tightens and you get a more
Mhm.
consistent
What
repetition.
what I thought was really interesting about that one specifically, I guess, was what he found was that over time the hammer arc becomes more consistent, or at least the point that the hammer hits becomes more consistent over time. But the arc itself becomes probably equally as inconsistent, and like the movement at each joint becomes equally as inconsistent, which I found that to be quite interesting. And that I think goes into how you're approaching different tasks matters, because success in hockey looks different than success in powerlifting or track or blacksmithing, so you will want more or less movement variability in different tasks, different skills, different sports. And the way you progress the difficulty of those things will look different based off of what they need. Like I would I would argue that for most skills, if we take the Posner or whatever, where you move from the cognitive to the associative to
Yeah.
um, the
Automatic.
between those stages, I would argue that the progression is probably pretty similar for most things, where you need to spend a lot of time working on the technique sort of in a vacuum, and repeating that over time so that you are able to hit the right positions. And maybe you need to do physical things to make sure you have the capabilities to get there, strength and mobility wise and stuff like that. Um, and then when you're going from that like sort of intermediate to expert stage, that is when there's a lot of different ways that you can approach it. I think because in some skills you'll want a lot more repetition and consistency, and finding um not just making sure that the movement is consistent, but is it the optimal way for it to be consistent for
Yeah.
you. um and then in a lot of other things you're trying to keep the base pattern the same and then adapt it to a variety of situations, and then make sure that you can keep that sort of base pattern the same when you're reacting to different things. And then you're working on your perception and and your ability to take in information and still and move properly. um, and then time constraints and all of those other things, so it's that I think matters a lot as well. The where you are performing the task influences the progression that you're going to take.
Yeah. And that's where I think it's good to have like an understanding or an awareness of these models and theories and concepts and things like
Mhm.
that. But I don't think you have to necessarily like live and die by one of them.
No, definitely not.
I think if you look at the motor learning ideas like Gentile's 2 stages of learning, Fitz and Posner 3 stage, Bernstein's degrees of freedom. At the end of the day, the common theme is that with more experience and more exposure to movements, we can create change
Mhm.
in behavior over time. And so I think that's kind of the important idea, is that like if you want somebody to learn something, you have to expose them to it, and you have to expose them relatively frequently to it so that they actually have a chance to perform the movement. And if you get somebody to do something once a month for 5 minutes, you're probably not creating that quote unquote relatively permanent change
Mhm.
that we talk about in the definition. So I think if the takeaway is frequent and consistent exposure to things allows people to learn. I think whether you want to follow more closely to one model or the next is that's kind of up to you. But at the end of the day, it's experience driven. And on the other side, with the motor learning ideas of capabilities and restrictions, if you look at Gentile's taxonomy, that 4x4 matrix, or Keel with timing and rate of movement, or Fleshman also looks at the idea of like a physical trait versus a like perceptual trait. Like, is this an ability that someone is physically capable of doing, but cannot perceive or like what's the word I'm looking for? Filter or use the information, or is it they can figure out the information, but they just can't physically perform the
Mhm.
task? I think those are helpful in terms of, like you mentioned, narrowing down. Is someone understanding the task but not physically able to do it? Maybe they need to be stronger. Maybe they need to be faster. There's a new physical ability they need to acquire. Or is it a case of they are able to do that, but it's their ability to perceive? So again, I think those are good models to understand that, knowing there could be, what ways can you progress those stages of learning? Do you have to increase the timing of things? Do you have to simplify the skill? Do you have to develop a new physical trait? I think they're great for giving you a foundation to work with, but I don't know if, like, I personally don't tie myself too tightly to any of those. Like,
No.
it's not like I would say, oh, I have this idea of helping my athletes learn something, and it's very close to this particular model. Like, I'm probably picking and pulling all sorts of little different things from each of them that I really like and I think
Mhm.
are helpful, and I'm putting it together in a model that hopefully has no weaknesses, because I'm pulling all the strengths from the
Yeah.
different things. But so I think it's good to have an understanding and exposure to them, but I wouldn't,
Mhm.
oh, go follow the Fitz and Posner model because that's exactly what you should do, or go follow this model because that's the only way to do it. There's probably a little bit of all of those things that are true
Mhm.
in in the coaching and learning we do with our athletes.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm glad you said that because they are all valuable. They all have pieces that work really well. And you can see, like, if you are a coach or if you are an athlete and you've experienced learning before, then you can see how they all work. Like that,
Yeah.
and that they all do work. Like the recently has probably been, well, actually, no, that's not true. You see the freeing of degrees of freedom, or the freezing of degrees of freedom, with beginners in all capacity. I was going to say I got a much better idea of it seeing my daughter learn how to move. You know, um, you see someone progress from not knowing anything to being automatic. You see, like, I can't remember who said it, but it's the triangle one where there's the individual, the task, and the environment, and then like in the center is like they all relate together to make the movement.
Yeah.
Um, like some of them I think are more maybe widely applicable, but that also makes them more vague. So um, they all they all are true, and none of them covers all bases, I think. So you want to just know, um, yeah, it's going to be experience and just trying things to see um, when you need to be manipulating different variables and stuff to to drive the adaptation that you're looking for.
And I think
Um,
the example you talked about with, um, diving into a little bit of detail with like Bernstein's model, where, like you said, the point in which the hammer hit over time became much more consistent, but the way in which they did it still had some variability. That's super important in like an open team evasion sport, where
mhm,
the goal in soccer, if you're, you know, the goalie, is to keep the ball out of the net. And if you're kicking the ball, it's to put the ball in the net. That goal doesn't change. But then based on the speed of the ball, where it's coming in from, what kind of spin does it have? Is there a defender in the way? Is it on the left? Is it on the right? All those, the variables around it change. And so I probably want to strike the ball in the same spot. Or as the keeper, I want to, contact the ball with my hands or whatever in the same spot. But everything else that I do to get to that goal is going to be different. And so at the end of the day, like, I don't care if the soccer player swung their leg a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right. If they hit the ball in the right spot and it goes in the net, I'm going perfect. That was successful in terms of what we wanted to do. Versus another model might work better for sports like powerlifting or weightlifting or track and field, where we have a set goal that we need to do, but we have a controlled and predictable environment for the most part to do that. We
mhm,
don't have to worry about all these changing, oh, all of a sudden this, thing appeared on the runway and I had to move out of the way and then I had to continue and do my long jump. Like, no, you get a clear
mhm,
path. You set up X number of meters away. You're always, running the same length and all that type of stuff. It's a closed environment. So that's where I think, again, they all kind of apply in different ways.
mhm,
So depending on you know, the challenge that you're being thrown at as a coach, who you're working with, the sport, having some idea of all these things gives you a different toolbox to go into depending
mhm.
on what you're doing. Because like you said, maybe in powerlifting, maybe you don't want everyone's squat to look different on every rep. In a competition, you want to know this is the squat that we do this is what we're relying on. We want to do that really well, as where in a sport like football, soccer, rugby, basketball, you can't always create the perfect environment to perform whatever action. So yeah, if you have to swing the hammer really wide or really narrow, if you get the hammer to the right point, the task is successful.
Mhm.
So yeah, I like that you brought that point up, because again, and that's, I think, the danger of being too tied to one of those models, is that it doesn't let you maybe
Mhm.
work with various populations or account for different scenarios you're going to get
Yeah.
in.
And I think that is an important point to bring up because as the coach, I think the focus for you and then therefore your athlete needs to be on like what does a successful movement actually look like. And I see a lot of focus on like this is how you do this movement, so we're going to make sure. And like yes, that needs to be the case because generally speaking, for a soccer player, there is going to be certain elements of a kick that makes it more likely to go in the right direction or more likely to have a lot of power behind it or whatever whatever you're going for. um, and we've talked about that before with whatever movement there is certain non-negotiables that you want to hit that just speak to this is objectively more efficient. So if
Yeah,
you are capable of doing this, we are doing this, and there's no way around that. But once you've got that, then you can put a little bit more attention or all of your attention probably on the goal of the movement. And if you're a blacksmith trying to hit the piece of metal as hard as possible, then you're going to take a really wide arc, you know, and that's maybe one of your non-negotiables to make sure that you're not having to, like, if you could do 200 strikes, you're not doing 1,000, you
exactly.
know, but once you've got the general technique down, then like the focus is okay, this is the point that you want to hit, and however you get there is fine. Um, and I think that's the case with any movement. And so I guess we can start getting into some of the things more specifically that influence learning. And the most important one in my mind, at least early on, is your focus of attention. Because with a beginner, you're not going to be making things very complex anyway. You're not introducing like, okay, you've just learned how to shoot a basketball and now we're playing 5-on-5. We're not like making sure you can hit like 30 free throws in 60 seconds. Um, we're not going to shoot on the run. We're like, you've learned how to shoot. So now we're focusing on the basket because the basket is where the ball is supposed to go, and that is the number one thing that's going to take you to the next step in your learning journey. And when that is consistent and when you can maintain that focus with a high degree of success and success in the movement, then we can start making things more complex. Um, and I think it is important at this time to make it clear that all of the research in every journal, in every book, by every person who's done it has found that external focus is better than internal focus and leads to a higher chance of success all of the time.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a pretty consistent finding. And when you think about the the theories of perception, it makes sense,
Mhm.
right? That the focus should be on the goal or the thing that you're trying to do. And
Mhm.
whether that's like the general motor or the central pattern theory, where there is a, like you said, that let's take shooting a basketball as an example. That's a stored central pattern, according to that theory, in your body. But then you have to make it, you have to adapt it or change it based on, are you shooting on the run? Are you shooting a stationary free throw? Is there a defender in the way? Is it a 9 foot shot? Is it a 23-foot shot? Is it like all those variables change? And so at the end of the day, if the focus is on, like you said, putting the ball in the basket, you're just adapting or changing that learned pattern to what's going on around you. And that's, again, it's not so much different from the like Gibson's ecological theory about like, constraints and affordances, and you observe and react. Oh, there's a defender in the way right here, so if I shoot it with this arc, it's going to go into their hand, and that's going to get blocked. That's not good. I need to put more arc on the ball to clear the defender. And so in the dynamic systems theory with the constraints and attractor states, and we're you're using the environment to kind of give people the information. And so when you look at those theories, again, whether you mostly believe in the central pattern theory or dynamic systems theory or the ecological theory, we, at the end of the day, there is a bit of that focus on the external goal or outcome, and then we are trying to find ways to manipulate or change the pattern or the action that we're doing to still meet the goal. And that's where I think it's a great way to, if you have an understanding of some of those theories, you can do exactly what you're talking about. Hey, the focus for you is to put the ball in the hoop. And now I'm going to provide you with some different challenges and different environments and different difficulties of putting the ball in the hoop. And I still need you to find a way to do that. And if you focus too much on the defender in front of you, or the speed at which you're running at, or, any of the other kind of more minute details of it, you've lost focus on the goals to put the ball in the basket. And so I like that you bring up that research, because I think it does tie in nicely with the perception that just give them a goal. And then as the coach, we almost manipulate those kind of perception, or those are the theories we're playing around with a lot, because you're trying to think about how can I make putting the ball in the basket more difficult for that individual. And I need them to still focus on just putting the ball in the basket and finding their own solution to defenders and, different offenses, defenses, positions on the court, different speeds of play to still put the ball in the hoop.
Well, that's right. And, I think it's important to remember that the body is smart, and the body's, very good at doing what it does. And that's why it's the one doing that and not you. And so if we tell the body what we want it to do, and that's like you giving your athlete the focus, which is the goal, and then the athlete focusing on it, the brain is telling the body, this is what we're going to try to do. Then the body's like, cool, let's do that. I will do my very best to make sure we do that. Instead of something like the core tight example I talked about in the beginning, if we apply it to basketball, it's like, okay, this is a 9-foot shot. That means I need to extend my elbow 34 degrees, and then release. And that will be successful for 9 feet. So, okay, now let's step it back to 12 feet. I need to extend 39 degrees, and that'll work well. And by you focusing on how far your elbow's extending, you're trying to tell your body, okay, this is the pattern I want to do, because I think that will lead to a greater chance of the ball going in the net. Versus you say, put the ball in the net, we're 9 feet away. Okay, step back to 12 feet, put the ball in the net, we're 12 feet away. The body can figure it out.
Yeah, I probably need a little more heat on the 12-foot shot than the 9-foot.
Yeah. And then it works, and you just keep practicing and practicing and practicing, and your body gets better at taking in the visual information, which is like seeing the size of the basket in your like visual, like how far away it is.
Yeah, there's
And
all kinds of things like that.
over time you get more and more accurate with hitting the like the proper distance and things like that. And I just think it's important that we don't get in the way of what our body is good at, because your body has been figuring out how to do things without your instruction, as like without the coach's instruction, for its entire life, and measuring joint angles and muscle activation and connective tissue tension and all of these different things for like the entire time the organism has been alive. So you coming in and saying that you need tighter lats because that will make it more likely that the ball goes in the net, it's probably not true. Like maybe a little bit, but if you focus on the tight lats, then now you're not focused on the basket, and it's probably not going in anyway.
You've changed your attention. Like you
Yeah.
talked about, we need to focus on the goal. And now all of a sudden you've made the goal for your body to do whatever with the elbow or whatever with the lats.
Hmm.
And now, oh, I successfully did that. Yeah, but that wasn't actually the task. The task was to put the ball in the hoop
Hmm.
or was
Yeah.
to get past the defender or to
Yeah.
defend the play or whatever it happens to be. And so I completely agree with you. The focus needs to be, on those things. And that's where I think those theories of perception can be so helpful to us as coaches, because we think about, okay, how can I create an environment or a space in which challenges the athlete with greater demands but still requires them to focus on the goal. So like you said, maybe I'm starting to learn how to shoot a basketball. There's no interference. I'm there, I'm stationary, I'm working on shooting at the same distance over and over again. Okay, now I've figured out kind of what the idea is of shooting the ball and putting it in the basket.
Hmm.
Now you start playing around with different positions on the court. I'm shooting from further, I'm shooting from closer, but I'm still allowed to do whatever I want. And then you maybe start to introduce, the drills where people, kind of run around and then stop and then shoot. So now you've introduced some more speed or, rhythm into the movement. Now you start to add defenders in. Now you start to, and you slowly,
Hmm.
you change the environment for the individual, but the goal has always been we put the ball in the basket.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
you start changing the constraints, you start changing the environment, you start challenging that motor pattern
Hmm.
to be able to still complete that goal despite what is being thrown around you. And this is just like a side note, but I think often what you see is a lot of that very basic skill development, and there's not much to bridge the gap between, hey, we're going to go out and shoot 25 three pointers, and it's just the ball gets past them, they shoot, the ball gets past them, they shoot, and then the next thing they're doing is a 5-on-5 half court, and then you're wondering why doesn't the 3-pointer look as good, because you've introduced so much chaos and variability and demand on that skill. You haven't bridged the gap necessarily,
Hmm.
where maybe they can't keep up with the speed of the play, or they're not used to defenders being in the way, or things like that. I think that's very common to see in sport coaching, is a lot of very, I don't want to say easy, but less demanding, less complicated drills on how to learn a skill, and then people just get tossed into the deep end
Yeah.
and then wonder why it falls apart.
Yeah. And I mean, it's tough in the team sport thing because you've got, the people that have been there for a while are at one skill level, and then, you know, rookie players or newer players, whatever, that are at a different skill level. So there isn't always the time,
The time,
maybe.
yeah, the time of the resources to do things perfectly.
Yeah. But, if you are doing things perfectly, then, you do want that. And you said slowly. I like that because you're matching the progression of the athlete, and there's probably always a little bit of time to work on the quote unquote fundamentals, but um, you do want to spend most of that time providing that like new information, but an amount of new information that is usable, right? Like that 5-on-5 is too much for them to, and they're too busy trying to succeed so that they don't have the time, like the capacity to focus on what they need to focus on to get better. Um,
Because there's too much chaos going around them. Oh, there's 5 defenders on the court.
exactly.
Where are they going? Who's doing this? Where are my teammates? Where's the ball?
Yeah.
That person's closing in on me quickly. Like there's
Hmm.
just, you might lose focus of the goals to put the ball in the hoop, and
Hmm.
you're focused on all the other things
Yeah.
around you.
Um, and and so, but increasing those things at the same rate. So you start with consistently, like I'm just shooting free throws from the same spot, same speed. There's no time constraints at all. And then you progress a little bit, like, okay, I'm getting this, so I'm gonna introduce a little bit of variability with distance. And then I'm going to introduce a little bit of variability with like adding some speed. And maybe the first time you do speed, it's like, okay, I'm doing this exact same like run around, stop, shoot, in the exact same point a bunch of times in a row. And then okay, I'll start doing it in a couple different positions and then from different angles. And, you know, once you've become a little bit more proficient, then you can start to increase uh the randomness or the variability within your practice. And then and then through that you really solidify that skill. And then once that skill's solidified, then you can start applying that skill in different situations and things like that. And that's kind of the next level where the perception piece I think is really, really important. And one thing that I found very interesting when it comes to like, especially when it comes to team sports, is when you progress as an athlete, there is a level of like you get better at the skills, the fundamentals, you know. Um, but being good at the fundamentals isn't enough. You need to be able to be good at the fundamentals in all of the situations that are going to come up, right? And what helps there is being able to, or you learn to focus on more relevant information was something that I came across. And a really easy to understand example was in baseball. If you're batting, um, you get really good on like the pitch machine, which comes out same speed, same spot every single time. So you can start to focus on like the time from release,
Yep.
for example, right? And so you know that it's the pitch has been released. Okay, one Mississippi swing, boom, hit it every single time, right? But when you are going up against an actual human being that's going to have a variable release, like location and speed and arc and all
And the
these different
wind up,
things,
everything's different.
exactly. Then a more reliable piece of information to focus on is time to impact, you know, so that you're focusing on the time to impact. You're letting your body take care of the rest of it, like the math involved in like the speed of the ball, the
Yeah.
distance of the ball, the curve, and all those different things. You don't need to worry about that. You're focusing on like, when is the ball going to be here, and then that's when I'm swinging, you know. And then you can apply that, you can focus on that specific thing for any pitch and be successful, you know. But the time to release is going to be variable every single time.
I think that's the key point. I was just about to add the other, this was in kin 350 something, whatever the perceptions of learning class was. I don't know if you took that one in undergrad at Waterloo.
Yes, 6 and 7, 356, 357.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, 357 was motor learning. 356 was like perception for motor learning, and we talked a bunch about those theories. And it's exactly what you talked about there. One of the biggest things I took away was that the and this is irrelevant of the theories, but the way that the body actually takes in visual information is it's so specific to things like facial recognition and other things like that, that it, like you said there, it's the body's dialed into, that's a pitching machine. That's different from a person. And so the
Yep.
information you take in is different. And one of the light bulb kind of moments where I was like, oh, came with like, you know, change of direction or agility training, right?
Mm,
And change of direction, I think, is great because you learn the fundamentals of how to move your body to change direction. But agility is when you have to couple that with the unpredictable environment and you are responding to things around you. And there's so many of the drills where someone approaches and you point left or point right, or lights are going off. And the moment that clicked for me was that, yeah, someone's going to respond differently to a person standing there pointing or a light going off than they will to an actual opposing player. And the information you're focusing on is completely different. And the body is so good at recognizing different pieces of information that you could get somebody running faster through some sort of quote unquote agility or change of direction course by responding to lights. But then, you know, I thought back to my days as like a DB and I go, yeah, responding to go left or right to a light would be way different than an actual physical receiver in front of me as a person. I'm watching the hips, I'm watching the shoulders, I'm watching the feet. There's other things that I'm looking at. And so that was kind of a light bulb moment for me, where I was like questioning the value of, you know, 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 the value of like those light trainers, or the idea of like bringing in open agility drills of like pointing and this and that, where the person doesn't know where they need to go. But I'm like, are they actually focusing on the right things? Because
Mm.
you're probably just watching their hand point left or right.
Well, I
But
was
as a
gonna,
defender covering a receiver, I was never watching the hands of a receiver.
yeah.
I was only watching the hands when the ball got thrown because, and even then, I'm watching the ball to try to time up where I'm going to go
Mm.
to break up a play, for example. But you're watching the hips, you're watching the feet to see what direction they're going to go, see if there's any, indication of, oh, that person's giving me a sign they're going to go left or right.
Mm.
And so I'm glad you brought that point up, because I think that's one of the, like, that was a light bulb moment for me in that class, was like, oh, okay. So
Yeah.
then as coaches, we really have to rethink some of our, you know, coaching strategies, because this is the case. And the body's so good at recognizing that stuff that we're better off to let it recognize the true stimulus and visual and perceptual information they're going
Mm-hmm.
to see in their sport, rather than like using lights or using this. And you know what? It's a hell of a lot easier to set up two people in a drill than it is to, oh, let me get all these lights. I'll make sure they're charged and then I'll put them on the wall. And like, it's
Yeah.
just easier too. So if it's better and easier,
Yeah.
take it.
Yeah. I was gonna say too that like, yeah, somebody standing there pointing is probably better than the lights. But somebody standing there taking a step, and then you're having the players react in whichever direction, if they're offense or defense, it'll be different, you know, and then you can expand that to like now it's a one-on-one drill and both people are competing or whatever, and it's you build it up that way, but you're right, then you're focusing on relevant information. And I read a book that had it cited this study on birds, which was really, really um,
Okay.
interesting. Okay. So I don't remember the type of bird that it was, but they fly together in flocks, like geese flying, like, the V, whatever.
Flying V. Yeah. Yeah.
So it wasn't a goose, but a study of these birds revealed that um, they react to each other very, very, very quickly. So, like, the leading bird tilts its wings slightly because they're going to start curving, whatever, to ride the current or whatever. Then, the birds behind that one, okay, 15 milliseconds later are doing the exact same tilt to match. Okay. Those same birds in a lab setting reacting to a light, oddly enough, 40 milliseconds. And that's suggesting that these birds don't have a baseline 15 millisecond reaction time. Not like this is a skill that can be developed by itself, which a lot of brain trainers and light trainers and those things like to suggest that reaction time and working memory and focus of attention can all be developed independently, which I don't I don't think so. Um, it's that perception becomes very, very task dependent. And you might be thinking like, oh, I don't care about what birds do. What do humans do? Um, the same thing happens with humans when they see something related to their sport. They react much, much, much faster than if they see something that's like, you know, this is a number two that's colored in red. Um, like that stuff is irrelevant, but you've spent hours and hours and hours and hours getting better at perceiving stuff related to your sport and related to like how you practice and things like that. So then spending more time in practice
Things that matter.
on things that matter and how like perceiving those different things. And another really helpful piece from this same book was um, there's theories of like the brain maps the environment and is like I'm sitting in my bedroom right now, so my brain theoretically has mapped my bed is like 10 feet long or like 8 feet long or whatever, and it's 4.5 feet wide. And so if somebody was to come in through my bedroom door and attack me, that I know that I need to jump this far to get away from them over the side of the bed. um, or what I more so agree with is my brain is all of the time, depending on what my goal is, perceiving opportunities and threats,
Yep.
and so if someone comes in and tries to attack me, I know that that is not a direction I can go because there's a wall there.
Exactly.
That is not an opportunity for escape. I know that I can go this way. I know that I can go that way, and that's it. And it doesn't matter what the environment is. I know what is threatening me. I know what opportunities I have. And so sport practice, I think, is better served in recognizing how do we take advantage of opportunities and how do we get away from threats and things like that. And that's all related to the skill of the individual in the task and all of those different things. Like my recognition of opportunities and threats is going to be different than my daughter's because I have a widely different capacity for physical movement,
Yep.
And that's going to be true of everybody. So, but yeah, anyway, I thought those things were interesting and pertinent.
Well, and that I think summarizes nicely like the reason why as coaches we need to understand or at least be aware of these motor learning and perception concepts and theories. You don't need to be experts in them. You don't need to be able to go out and do research projects on them and whatever. But I think you at least need to have a basic level of understanding of those because, again, even just the conversation we've had today has probably sparked some thoughts for anyone listening about, oh, maybe I would change the way I do that drill because I didn't think about it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at the very least, these theories get you thinking about how people take in information and how people process that information and how it actually influences movement outcomes, which ultimately is the business that we're in is,
Mm-hmm.
you know, can we get people to learn and perform movements in the way that both ourselves and they would like to perform the movement? Because assuming the athlete or the client or whoever wants to be successful at their goal or what they're doing. And so like the examples you're giving are good reminders of like when people think about learning, age is not necessarily the big, like people are always surprised. Oh, look at that 9-year-old kid and that amazing thing they can do. And it's like, sure, okay, they're 9. Maybe that's more impressive than someone who's 20. But at the end of the day, age doesn't drive the learning, it's experience and time on task that drives the learning. And like you said, having an idea of these motor learning theories, having an idea of these perceptual theories gives you the tools to allow anyone you're working with, I think, to spend more time on task, gaining relevant experience. Because at the end of the day, if someone's 15 years old or someone's 25 years old, if they both have 5 years worth of experience or equal amounts of time on task, it doesn't matter that maybe one is older or younger. The actual learning ability of those individuals would be equal-ish with the
Yeah.
skill because they've both spent equal time on task.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where I think you can gain an advantage where if you only practice a couple of times a week with your athletes or your teams or clients or whatever, if you spend more time on relevant things, you will speed up the learning process because again, it's not age. It's almost not even time. It's the experience that you have
Mm-hmm.
with things. And so I think that's to me, kind of the big takeaway of
Mm-hmm.
today is not to be an expert in a research level capable individual of these theories, but know them well enough that you can figure out what experience and time on task do the individuals I work with need to be able to create a relatively positive change in
Mm-hmm.
how they do things.
Yeah, and just the willingness to experiment and try different things, and um, and think like, is there another way for this can be done, or um, can I get more out of this drill? Like you mentioned the agility or change of direction stuff. Like you don't need to do one drill to work on the perception element and then another drill to work on the speed element. You can do both at the same time. It's fine. Like um, I don't really a lot of I guess it's just the way that things have been done in the sport coaching world is that you have your fundamentals time and then you've got your scrimmage time and small group drill time, whatever, and they're all valuable for sure, but you could probably combine some of those and eliminate others and get more out of the time that you're using. And yeah, and then you make the change faster, which is what we're all
Exactly.
here for, right?
Exactly.
Mhm. Is there anything else that you think is important to talk about before we uh, end the episode and to set the stage for the next one?
Um, No, I mean, I'll talk. Obviously, we talked a lot about, you know, some of the motor learning and perceptual theories today, and how people are performing. A little more to come, I think, on technical models.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, for sure.
and and we didn't talk at all about making mistakes, which I think fits better with more the application coming back
Yeah, we didn't
the
really
next time.
talk
So when you
about.
start to
Yeah.
apply these theories, what happens when people make mistakes and they screw things up? Because it's going to happen. And we need it to happen in order for people to learn. So I think the only other thing I would say is mistakes have to happen for learning
Mhm.
to occur. But I think that's best when we start talking about cueing, instruction. How do we pick the right drills? I think then talking about the technical models for what to
Mhm.
look for and our mistakes being made, that's kind of the meat and potatoes of what we would be doing as coaches, like
Yeah.
live in front of the athletes is that type of stuff. So
Mhm.
for anyone listening who thought these guys talked about learning and there was nothing about mistakes and what to look for, I think that sets the stage really well
Mhm.
for the next part. We talk about cueing and
Yeah, that's a good
instruction,
point.
drill selection, and things like that, but it's not lost on us.
Yeah.
It's just the only point I would want to make.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we didn't talk about feedback really that much either. So yeah, that all fits in really well together, which is good.
Yeah.
The only other thing that I wanted to say is related to the perception piece that maybe should be one of the first things we talked about perception wise, is that your brain is always trying to like keep you alive is the main thing. Um, and so it's trying to always look for threats, which is why that's a good piece probably to add into your practice, the recognition of threats and things like that. Um, and it's also trying to not use more energy than it needs to.
Yeah.
So, which is why, we as 28, 30-year-old adults don't stop and pick up every single leaf on the sidewalk. Like my daughter literally was 2 months ago, stopping every single leaf and picking it up, um, because we would get nothing done.
It's a waste
And
of energy.
it's a waste of energy. And we would probably die of starvation because no one would remind us to eat. We'd be too enthralled with the sidewalk. Anyway, um, that's important, an important piece for learning, and why always making sure that there's new information to be gleaned from whatever drill or instruction. And especially if you work with children, they probably don't have the politeness or whatever to at least seem like they're paying attention when there's nothing for them there. So if people aren't paying attention, then they're probably beyond the drills that you're having them do, to
Exactly.
some extent anyway. So
Exactly.
there's something there as well. Um,
That's
yeah.
like I said, I think that sets the stage nicely for more the application side of things in the
Hmm.
next part, where
Yeah.
we really kind of dive into the what are you doing live in front of you with the actual coaching or
Hmm.
working with your clients,
Hmm.
because that's where
Yeah.
all this stuff eventually has to come to life.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm excited to get into that for sure. Um, but before that, I'm excited to hear what of the probably 9 million different things you've discovered musically since we last recorded.
Well, I know we've I hope for sure that you have something to share today, because sometimes we go, okay,
I
we'll give an extra week of recording so Braden has time to listen to some new music.
have one thing.
We've
It's
had
not even
4 or 5 months now to figure out exactly what you could be listening to. Um, I did at one point at the end of the summer. I kind of got into, well, not into, like I've always listened to house EDM type
music.
type stuff, but I was very yeah, I was spending a lot more time listening to that sort of at the end of the summer. And so I'm just pulling up Spotify here because I don't remember the name of trying to. Oh, see, it shows I really like the songs, but I don't know the artist that well because it just comes up on the playlist and like, oh, I like this stuff.
Yeah.
But there's a like EDM DJ artist, whatever you want to call them, uh, Kirby, Kirby with a C, so Curbi. That's why I
Mm.
had to look it up because I knew I was going to butcher the spelling, but some really really good stuff, really catchy, just kind of you know EDM kind of flow type beats.
Nice.
So every time I have like a house or EDM kind of dance music playlist going on, anytime something by them pops up, it's always pretty good. And I learned how to play Rasputin or
Oh,
Rasputin
nice.
by
Good for
Boney.
you.
Such from like what is it, the 70s that song's from?
Yeah.
Such a good tune, like kind of old school disco funk
Yeah.
vibe. Super fun song to play on the bass.
Yeah.
So I probably had that thing on repeat way more than I should have, but that's kind of, the most recent things I can think of was learning
Yeah.
to play that tune and doing that type of stuff because we don't have enough time for me to get into the 4 or 5 months worth of listening.
Yeah.
So
No, that's
a little
good.
bit of new stuff and a little bit of like a classic,
Yeah.
like, legends never die type things. Like such a good tune.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
No, that's a good tune.
so yeah,
I
that's where I've
will
been at.
I will have to start putting in some effort to listening to some new stuff. Because musically I still listen to the same stuff. But I will share this because this has been really fun for me. A podcast that I got really into and I'm fully caught up now and I'm depressed about it is Dungeons and Daddies. It is a
Oh
D&D
man, let's go.
podcast. It is not a BDSM podcast, and I say that at the beginning of every episode. There's one episode that is BDSM, but it's funny, so it's
Yeah.
fine. It is a D&D podcast about four dads from our world, Earth, that get sucked into the D&D realm, like the Forgotten Realms, and have to find their lost sons. And what I love about it the most is that they just lean so hard into the stereotypes. So you've got like your sports dad, you've got your rock and roll dad, you've got your like granola hippie dad,
Yeah.
and your
the
emotionally distant stepdad. Um, so I think it's really really funny, and they're in season 2 right now, in which they're playing like the former dad's
Now,
grandchildren.
is it based on like them actually playing a game as those characters and that's where they're getting the story from, or are they developing the story just kind of on their own?
No, they like the actors
Yes.
are playing Dungeons and Dragons as like they're role playing these
As okay, and
characters.
that's what I
So
wasn't sure.
it's
So if the
it's happening
storyline
live.
is
Yeah.
is kind of happening organically based on the dice rolls and like
Yeah.
the random events that can happen within the game.
Yeah. So
Okay.
it is like there is stuff that is dependent upon dice rolls and like the random events in the game. They have like on Patreon, they have a like an after show talk show kind of thing, which they released one of those episodes on Spotify, which is why I don't pay for it, which is fine.
Yeah.
Um, but so I do know that there is some collaboration beforehand, just like because they want it to be entertaining as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that because they all are like writers and comedians and
Okay.
things like that. So they're just like they'll talk to the DM and be like, what if this was kind of the direction that this character's arc went in, or what if this was the resolution of, so it's there's a little bit of direction assistance, but it is also random.
Well, I
And
like
if
that's kind of random based on the game because then there is an
yeah,
element of like the
yeah,
unknown for everyone involved that
yeah,
the game
absolutely.
takes a turn and then that
Mhm.
changes the story and then it's like, oh, that's kind of it makes it fun and exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it's a really good, really funny. And then one mildly music, well, it is music, one music related thing. Um, I learned how to play the Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Um, at least the part that everybody knows, uh, like would recognize anyway. I can play that on the xylophone.
Oh, let's go.
Yeah, yeah, I can play a couple. I think I can do Twinkle Twinkle Little Stars as well. Um, yeah, so I got my repertoire is expanding.
Musical talent over here.
Yeah,
This is
so
expanding.
yeah, I got to find a way to play with my daughter's toys that's entertaining for me too. So
That I figured that was the case.
yeah. Um, anyway, yeah, that was a lot of fun. I'm glad we did this. I'm excited to get back into this in a regular routine.
It's good to be back on the air. The
Yeah,
Wi-Fi didn't die.
it didn't.
And
Yeah,
if it dies now, who cares? The episode's done.
it's done.
So we're
Yeah, it's
we're
over.
good.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks for coming along, world. That was the Speed Strength Show.
And we'll see you next time.
Peace.